Chuck, you've advised many companies during M&As and proxy contests, and we just, as Andrew said, talked about reputation capital. Can you quantify what a reputation is worth? Can you tell us experiences where you've worked on deals where reputation has hurt or hindered success?
Sure, and I think one of the things to keep in mind is a company's reputation is not monolithic. A company can have a great reputation with its customers for making high-quality products and delivering good service, but have a terrible reputation in the investment community, or be great at environmental stewardship, but the employees hate working there. And so I think it's critical when you go into a transaction, or really any announcement, a CEO transition or anything, you understand what your reputation is going into the announcement, and how you will either use that reputation to further your business goals in the announcement, or conversely use the announcement to either rehabilitate your reputation or to reinforce the reputation that you have. I think too often we get caught up in a kind of high-profile M&A situation, thinking just about the finite world of that M&A situation, getting to the finish line, getting success, closing the deal. But really, I think if you do this right, you can use that to either reinforce the reputation you have with your various audiences, or in many cases, rehabilitate what is a unfortunate reputation. I think quantifying it is difficult, and I know Andrew mentioned at the outset that it can be quantified, but I think it's too often companies try to assign a single number or single value to reputation, and I think it's really much more complex. We look at reputation as a mosaic that's put together with pieces from your different stakeholders, and knowing when to apply a certain piece as a resource, as an asset in a transaction is critical.
Great. Carol, much of your work has been done in the boardrooms of companies. Can you talk to us about where the board fits into the question of reputation versus where the management and where the company fits in?
Sure. The board is, if you think of a situation in which the board is actually the animating force behind a particular course of action, so that may be because it's in a special committee, for example, and that's where the decision-making will be going and will be done. And in some cases, the communications is also run out of the special committee. And so in that case, you'll have a group of people who aren't necessarily, in the context of that particular company, used to messaging on behalf of that company. They may be very skilled in it in their own companies, but as you know, there will be a different message for every company, and it has to be given in context. And so the challenge for a small group of independent directors who are now responsible for the issuer's reputation in the context of a transaction is to make sure that they actually understand the record as it stands. So to your point, where is our reputation at the moment, and where are we trying to go with this? But you're doing it with a group of people who don't typically do it for that company in that context. The other thing that the boards, I think, don't worry about enough is that no matter how a transaction goes, the reputation of the individual directors will be impacted because people talk about the individual directors, and their link to a transaction stays with them on other boards and in other experiences. And so it's important, although not often done, that people worry about the reputations of the individual directors in the context of the transaction and after the transaction is over.
Great. Boyd, when it comes to reputation, you've got enormous time pressures to put your story out. You've got individual reputations of board members that play a part, no doubt. You've got corporate reputations, different reputations. How does it all play into what you do when you are getting your stories done?
Well, I think, for better or for worse, we make in the media increasingly snap judgments about the import and the ramifications of transactions. So, where once deadline would be 5 o'clock and you had all day to sort of ponder it and talk to people and check out if the companies you're talking about really are, the way you think they are. Now the first story's out 5 minutes, the next one's out 10 minutes past that. There's probably a column on it with an opinion 20 minutes after that. So increasingly you lean on the reputation of a company to enable you to make those quick judgments about what this means and who the players are, et cetera. And those judgments rely, very much on what you know about a company, what's quickly available in an archival search, that sort of thing. And then very quickly, once the storyline of a transaction is established, it becomes difficult to shift that. And if a transaction is announced at 8 a.m., in a large part, the the sort of narrative and story and drama is the script is kind of in motion frankly, by noon. And so, where once you might have the luxury as the actors in a transaction or a proxy contest to call after the fact and explain, really how this all fits into the big mosaic and the big picture. By the time you've done that, you're probably behind the ball these days. So I think that ensuring that your reputation is where you want it to be is something that has to be ongoing and done, in advance of an announcement.
All right, so you've got 4 hours to basically set the tone and set the stage?
You can fix it after that, but if you've ever tried to go to a reporter and tell them that, boy, you've got this all wrong, and you're looking at it through the wrong end of the telescope, and you should really change it around by deadline, and it's not what you already told your editors it is. If you've ever done that, it can be a bit of a hill to climb.
If I may just jump onto
Yeah.
that, I think that is, it's entirely consistent with one of the things that we often tell our clients, which is, who come to us and sometimes say, we want to use the media to change our reputation. And we say to them, the media reflects your reputation, it doesn't shape your reputation. And I think the fact that you have to make these snap judgments is a big part of that. If you want the media to be reflected in the reputation, you have to go directly to your other stakeholder groups, your investors, your employers, your regulators, and create the reputation with them. And then the media will, over time, reflect it. But to try to go to the media to create your reputation, I think it's a very backwards way of doing it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And it's interesting, to your point about the reputation not being monolithic, is I guess how you put it. The one that we, as the media, don't often encounter is how employees feel about a company until the company is under great stress. And then we have employees reaching out to us. So, it's probably in an M&A or a proxy contest less of an issue, but boy, when it comes to, if you're dealing with crisis communications about a company that's under stress, you want to make sure your reputation with employees is there, because that suddenly becomes, a font for us, which is probably the last thing you want. Why am I telling you this?
Andrew?
Specific to a deal, so how important is reputation? How important is reputation in a just say no situation? So maybe Abernathy and McGregor, there's a deal that's happening. They decide to say no, and we don't want to do a deal. How important is reputation with respect to the board and management at that point?
I think it's critical, because really what you're doing when you're saying just say no is, we've got a better plan. Our standalone plan or the existing strategy that we've articulated is one that we think is ultimately going to create more value for shareholders and be better for the long term for the company. Your ability to actually deliver on the plan that you've articulated is what's in question. And that is the reputation of your board, your management team to execute, to respond to market forces, to do what you need to do to deliver on that plan. If you have a poor reputation or no reputation, and an acquirer or an activist has come forth with a plan that they have very intelligently articulated is going to deliver more value, you can't just say no. Your reputation doesn't allow you to. But if you've got a reputation and a track record, it absolutely will create a foundation for a more successful defense against those kinds of situations.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
How publicly communicated is the concept of the business judgment rule in the U.S.? When a board uses business judgment rule to just say no, and to Boyd, is that as much a concept here in Canada? So perhaps both of you. Sorry, I'm not going to take. I'll stop. No more questions.
I think the business judgment rule is a conversation that happens a lot more inside the boardroom than does outside of the boardroom. Certainly, it's something that the boards think about. They get counseled about by their legal advisors. But in the heat of battle, I don't think that investors and reporters and others who are following a transaction really think about it too much. It's not high on their list of elements they use when deciding whether a certain choice is the right choice, either to vote their shares one way or another, or to vote their proxy one way or another. So I think it is not well understood outside the boardroom. I almost think that sometimes in the boardroom people use it too much as a crutch or to hide behind. Because when they get out into the real world and try to sell their strategy, no one's paying attention to business judgment rule, I don't think.
Yeah, I would have to say that, the business judgment rule, to my mind, means that if you make, and there's too many lawyers in the room
Reasonable.
here. I'm going to get corrected on this. But if you make a reasonable judgment and follow through the proper processes, that you can make a judgment and you're protected legally from the ramifications. That doesn't mean it's a good decision. It has no bearing on whether it was a good decision. So, I mean, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I mean, my concern and the people I talk to, their concern is whether that decision I think we all assume, rightly or wrongly, and hopefully rightly, that people have followed the proper steps in the boardroom, and if you haven't, we'll find out and pillory you. But that has no bearing on the actual judgment that they've come to. That's just, is this a good idea or not?
There's almost nothing I can say to amplify what Boyd said. I think that's absolutely right. The audience for the business judgment rule is the courts and the regulators. That's where you tell your story about the business judgment rule. You think you've done everything right, and a court would agree with you, and the investors say, doesn't matter to me, you're not driving value for me. It's the wrong audience. Great.
I have a question about boards. I mean, normally the board is separate from management and separate from the corporate reputation, but say with an activist shareholder, often board members' reputations, relevant experience, independence come directly under attack from the activist shareholder. How do you advise boards and directors specifically in those situations?
So I think in all of these issues, it's important to remember that the board and management are not on different teams. They're the same team. They play different roles on the same team. The challenge, again, for directors, when a shareholder is speaking to them directly, as they will do in many cases, the question is, who's the right person to respond to that? So there will be cases in which a shareholder goes directly to the board where the appropriate response comes from management. And there will be other situations in which the appropriate party to respond is very clearly the chair. So it has to do with who the shareholder is, what the issue is, frankly, who management and the board is. That's one of the decisions that gets made really early on, and it's very important to make sure that you get off on the right foot in terms of that communication back.
I will say that I think a lot of times board members individually don't understand the scrutiny they will be under in a contested situation. We had a situation where an activist shareholder was going after a regional bank in the US, and the shareholder took out a full-page ad in the local paper in the hometown of the headquarters of the bank, pictures of each of the individual board members with a headline that said long-term liabilities. And this is what those board members woke up to when we went to their clubs and when they went to pick up their kids at school. Everyone's looking at the paper and saying, why are you a long-term liability? And that they are not under a rock in these situations, and they need to understand that from the beginning, and they need to be prepared for it. And they need to have the discipline, as Carol was saying, not to speak as individuals, but to really understand who is authorized to speak. Is it the chairman, is it the CEO, is it somebody else, and when and why and how should they behave? So it's an education process, because these board members may be very sophisticated and experienced, but have never been in a contested situation before.
They're very often they're very experienced at speaking, at being the spokesperson themselves in a particular context. To me, it's very important for board directors to understand that it's not that they can't speak well or couldn't be the spokesperson, but in this case, it's not their role, and the role they're playing is far more important off stage than on. Sometimes hard to sell.
I'm just pleased to hear someone's still buying full-page newspaper ads. But beyond that, we find a couple of dynamics dealing with directors. One, in some cases, there's a bit of a generation gap, in the sense that management will be much more used to dealing with media because they've grown up, in a society where people are a lot more open with the media. The directors might have come from a generation previous, where in Canada, the relationship with the media was a lot more, perhaps arm's length or nice. I mean, we're still pretty nice up here by most standards, but so that is one issue. And then the other issue is, directors, we do find in a situation, again, where there's a significant question around a strategy, or maybe where there's consensus in the boardroom on the face of it, but not in actuality. People feel like they've been pushed into a decision or what have you. The boardroom becomes a very interesting place to report.
How often do you actually feel like you have accurate information into what's happening behind closed doors in the boardroom versus just hearsay or speculation?
Always, of course.